Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session 101 of Affordable Housing Electrification Training Series. We'll give it a minute or two to let some folks join us today, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, I'm seeing some folks coming in. Yeah, we'll probably just get started. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Angel Rodriguez. I am the Senior Sustainability Program Associate here at the California Housing Partnership. And today we're going to be taking a big picture look into some policies, programs, and technologies that are driving building decarbonization in the affordable housing space. And so we'll touch on some state and federal policies to some technologies, utility allowances, and just some funding opportunities after that to help you meet your project goals. So thank you everyone for being here today. I'm glad you could join us. Go on to the next slide. So as part of this year's training series, we're excited to introduce and thank a new sponsor, the Equitable Building Decarbonization Program, or also known as EBD. And so, for some background, EBD is the upcoming direct install program supported by the California Climate Investment, which is a statewide initiative that just allocates some cap and trade dollars into reducing greenhouse gas emissions, boosting the overall economy, and improving the public health and overall environment. So thank you, EBD, for this training's contribution. Go on to the next slide. And so, in addition to welcoming our new sponsor, we'd also like to express our deep gratitude to our ongoing supporters who have been just really instrumental into making the electrification training series possible year after year. And so, a special thanks to the Low Income Weatherization Program, also known as LIWIP, the Building Initiative for Low Emissions Development Program, known as BUILD, and as well as the Solar on Multifamily Affordable Housing Program, known as SOMA, and the Comprehensive Affordable Multifamily Retrofits Program, known as CAMR. Quite a handful of acronyms we have in the affordable housing space, but thank you for our returning sponsors. You know, together these partnerships really enable us to deliver valuable resources and training to advance equitable and sustainable building measures all throughout California. Go on to the next slide. So before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping notes. Today's session is going to be recorded, and we'll be sharing the slide deck after the session. And in case if you have any questions, definitely feel free to drop them in the Q&A box, and we'll either address them throughout the session in the chat or during the designated Q&A time that you have allocated throughout the training session today. And once we wrap up today's training, we'll be sending out a link with a survey. So please, when that time comes around, take a minute to complete our short survey. We'll definitely appreciate your feedback as it will help us move forward and improve future trainings. And so for today's agenda, we'll begin with a review of key policy updates, energy codes, and a couple of available incentive programs. And then after, we'll open up the floor to some Q&A. And then we'll either take questions, unanswered questions from the Q&A, or take any live questions during that time. And this will be followed by a quick 5-minute break, just for a quick snack, some water, refreshment. And when we come back, we'll be going over some technologies, some rehab pathways, and utility allowances. And then we'll wrap up the session with the final Q&A and address any remaining questions and close out session 101. And so for today, we've got a great lineup of speakers from the Association for Energy Affordability, also known as AA, and from the California Housing Partnership, also known as CHP, or as the partnership. And so starting off with Ari, Ari is a project manager with AEA, and she leads the delivery of technical assistance on the build program. So definitely providing accessible and impactful decarb assistance in the affordable housing space and with different stakeholders all across the state. And so with more than 10 years of experience in building science and decarbonization. RE is really driven by delivering education and problem solving on the ground to support the transition to a decarb built environment. And so her areas of expertise include energy modeling, equipment selection, renewables, energy efficiency, incentive, layering, code compliance, and local permitting. So really a master of all. Thank you, Ari, for being here with us today. And we also have with us Andrew Dawson. So Andrew is the Senior Manager of Policy Advocacy at the partnership. He has worked across housing finance, sustainability, and the research teams to help shape policy initiatives and advocate for legislative and regulatory changes, all in collaboration with nonprofit advocates and government agencies. So his policy work is really covered by topics in electric vehicle charging, multifamily, affordable housing databases, and just contractor diversity with TCAC awardees. And then I would also like to introduce Scott Adler. Scott is a senior associate in projects with AEA and works on the implementation of different multifamily incentive programs such as LIWIP, SMUD, and BayRent. So really an advocate for pushing forward these different rebates and delivering energy efficiency and electrification upgrades. And we also have with us Blanca de la Cruz. Blanca is the Managing Director of Sustainability here at the partnership and helps lead clean energy programs that help preserve affordable housing. And ever since 2014, she has expanded access to incentives for energy efficiency, solar, electrification, decarb, all through programs like LIWIP, SOMA, Build, Camera, and EBD. So really just advocating for equitable decarb statewide and in the city of Los Angeles. And lastly, myself, I will also be part of today's speaker series. And for some background, I am part of the partnership's sustainability team, and I assist in with partner agencies and stakeholder groups with the implementation of sustainable housing and clean energy programs, mainly in the LIOP and CAMERA program. So each of us definitely brings on a different perspective for today's training, ranging from policy advocacy to technical assistance. And together we'll be providing you all with a well-rounded overview of decarb in the affordable housing space. And now to finally kick off our affordable housing electrification training series, session 101, I'll hand it over to Andrew Dawson, who will kick us off with policy and regulations.
Hi, everyone. So I'll be talking a little bit about the policy that's happened in the last year or so related to electrification, some of the programs, and as well as what we're looking forward to next year in terms of policy. So on the next slide, we could go to some of or the slide after this, federal work that's been done. So in Trump's big, beautiful bill, but our boss likes to call it the big, ugly bill in some ways. There were some changes to the renewable energy tax credits. So these are the tax credits used to install solar in a lot of multifamily affordable housing. If your construction start is prior to January 1st, 2026, you are not subject to the foreign entity of concern requirements or the 2027 cliff. However, if your construction start is between January 1st, 2026 and July 4th, 2026, you're subject to the foreign entity of concern requirements, and those are certain requirements about where the solar or where your energy is coming from, your energy systems is coming from. Often that is China, and that's going to impact kind of how many tax credits you get or what happens there. If your construction is sorry, one slide previous. If your construction is after July 4th, 2026, you have until the end of 2027 to place in service before no solar credits are available, which is a big issue because the credits really help with buying down the cost of the solar, especially with even if you're doing like a PPA or an SSA agreement like with Sunrun or SunPower or anything like that. On the next slide is a couple other federal changes. One is a low-income housing tax credit expansion. So that's expanding, instead of doing the 50% test, now there's a 25% test, and the expansion of the 9% tax credits. We are expecting an increasing amount of resyndications as bonds become more available. And so this is a great time, maybe not right now, as there's a pipeline of new construction that needs to happen, but in the midterm, looking at rehabs in any way and resyndications to get tax credits involved there. And then the Inflation Reduction Act has had some things happening. One, in California, we took some comments on the Solar for All program, but recently the Trump administration is trying to cancel the program. And so that's going to be a whole mess to deal with, as well as with the federal Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund awardees. They started providing products. A lot of it was subsidized debt products that were really helpful for some of the affordable housing developers, but that had to stop because the funds were frozen. And now there's kind of a lot of legal actions taking place. So it's not fully gone, but it's very uncertain about what's going to happen here. Moving on to the state side, in the state budget, in one of the trailer bills called AB 130, they froze the building codes to 2025 levels for 6 years. Um, that is going to impact decarbonization or how the building codes are built out now. However, they're frozen to the 2025 levels, which gives affordable housing developers a way to really learn the codes and be able to be pretty proficient in them and use some of the state programs in order to reach those codes and really understand the decarbonization space as it relates to affordable housing. Last year, there was also an expansion of the California Utility Allowance Calculator. This is a utility allowance calculator that is different than the Public Housing Authority ones that really emphasizes energy efficiency as well as decarbonization. Uh, Before it was limited to a very small number of projects that can use it, but now it's been expanded to include almost a lot of projects in the affordable housing space, including new construction, any rehab projects applying for tax credits, or any re-syndications, and any existing tax credit projects that install solar, which if you're installing solar, QAC is really helpful in making sure those utility allowances are much lower. And so it makes a lot more sense to kind of go to the QAC if you're installing solar. On the next slide, we could see some of the programs and some things that are happening in the space right now. Right now, the Solar and Multifamily Affordable Housing Program is going through a proceeding. This proceeding is talking about the inclusion of new construction in the program, which is really exciting because that's something a lot of affordable housing developers have wanted. You don't have to go through the capital stack or go through kind of your lien holders and to figure out where you can get permission to do solar. Now, with new construction, you kind of build that into the deal from the start. We're also looking at properties with owner-paid utilities. This will be very helpful for permanent supportive housing specifically, but also any properties with owner-paid utilities utilizing this program. As of right now, they cannot use this program. It could only be for individually metered properties, but with owner-paid utilities, that'll be a very exciting development for affordable housing developers. And now we have the inclusion of battery storage in the SUMA program, so you can install both solar and battery storage to help when electricity prices are really high, and help with resiliency. The other big thing that's happening is the Equitable Building Decarbonization Program is starting up. Angel talked about them being as one of the sponsors this year for the Electrification training series. What's really exciting is it's a direct install program, so it funds everything from the equipment to the installation of the equipment, with over $400 million in funding for electrification across the entire state. This is a really exciting program because one of the things is hopefully it could be really easy to implement in conjunction with some of the other state programs, so it could be leveraged really well. The other big thing that's happening right now is that cap and trade program is being reauthorized. The Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program is one of those programs within the cap and trade portfolio. And so advocacy is being done to make sure that allocation stays committed through the program. That's not as much electrification as more of just like how climate and housing kind of work together. But that program does fund all electric housing. And then on the next slide, we'll be going into kind of the building codes themselves and the standards. And remember, with AB 130, the 2025 levels will be frozen for 6 years. And I'll pass it over to Ari for that.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That was great. Yes, hi everyone. I'm Ari. I'm glad to be here. Thanks so much to the partnership for having me as part of this webinar. I am going to present today on how building electrification is written into and supported by code. Next slide, please. Yeah, so why are buildings important? Just a little bit of background. In this snapshot from 2016, um, buildings accounted for 26% of greenhouse gas emissions in California. And of that 26%, the lion's share really came from gas, space heating, and water heating. So thanks to California's proactive transition to carbon-free renewable electricity, electrification of these end uses translates into decarbonizing the built environment. So what does that look like? Next slide, please. Yeah, let's just start kind of with the end of this timeline. 2045 is the goal year for California to be 100% zero carbon electricity and statewide carbon neutrality equitably. So how this is going to happen is, again, through that transition to carbon-free electricity, and then with the electrification of end uses. So let's take a look at Energy Code. Next slide, please. The California Energy Code, Title 24, Part 6, is updated on a triennial cycle, so every 3 years. Just a little bit of background, it started in 1974 when the Warren-Alquist Act spurred the creation of the California Energy Commission and the Energy Code Title 24, Part 6. So each of the updates is designed to reduce energy use of new homes by a third or more cost effectively. It also will address changes in standards, practices, and policy, increase stringency, and then maintain loading order. So it approaches energy efficiency first, and then following that, production and storage. So our current code cycle is the 2022 code cycle. This one went into effect on January 1st, 2023. And the upcoming code cycle 2025 has been adopted, and it will go into effect January 1st of this coming year, 2026. But as Andrew noted, residential code will be frozen at that 2025 code cycle. So there will be, a 6 years with this code cycle rather than the commonly 3 years. So let's take a look at the next slide. Now, some of us may really be familiar with Energy Code compliance, but as a quick orientation, Energy Code includes mandatory measures. These are minimum requirements that must always be met. And then after that, it includes prescriptive measures. Prescriptive measures define the standard building design. For 2022 and 2025, we do see heat pump baselines for space and water heating. This is a simple approach and it doesn't allow any trade-offs. The other option is the performance path, which is a more flexible approach, and it does allow trade-offs of the prescriptive measures. Mandatory measures, must still be met at all times, but the performance path allows the use of CEC-approved software to model the building energy use. The proposed building just needs to meet or exceed the standard design. We do see the performance path very commonly for new construction and larger alterations, larger additions. But for alterations, changeouts, retrofit projects, the prescriptive approach is very common. Next slide, please. So today I'm really going to cover electrification in multifamily energy code. And just a note that the focus of this code review is really that subset. I'm not going to be covering all code requirements. So, there is more than this, but let's take a look with some mandatory measures. Next slide, please. Yeah, so there are electric-ready mandatory measures for multifamily buildings. And throughout these slides, I've also included the code section references, for your information. Mandatory multifamily code is section 160, and electric-ready requirements are 160.4 and 160.9. So this applies to new construction only. The building electrical system shall be sized to meet the future electric requirements of all the end uses below. So we do have dwelling unit heat pump space heater ready, electric cooktop ready, electric clothes dryer ready, and that's for in-unit and common as applicable. And then individual heat pump water heater ready. And that's already in place under 2022. Coming up in 2025, central heat pump water heater ready is added to the electric ready requirements. So as we'll see when we go into prescriptive requirements, mixed fuel buildings are still allowed under code. But if you do have gas for any of these end uses in new construction, you do have to provide for the future electrification of those systems. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the prescriptive guidelines. Next slide, please. So for unitary heat pump water heating, and this is your in-unit water heating, there are a couple of different options. I'm going to just go over them. The first option is a single 240-volt heat pump water heater. There are additional requirements in climate zones 1 and 16, which are kind of those most extreme cold climate zones. The second option is a single heat pump water heater that is NEA Tier 3 rated, and that rating just confirms that it's going to be able to perform, so you don't need to do those additional requirements. And then option 3 is a gas or propane instantaneous water heater. So you can see here that the prescriptive baseline still has a mixed fuel option here. It still has gas as an option for your in-unit water heating. And coming up in 2025, we haven't seen any substantive changes to these options here. So if you're pretty familiar with installing unitary water heating this code cycle, you should be set for next code cycle as well. Now, what about for alterations for retrofit projects? We do have a couple of options that really do align with the new construction. So a natural gas or propane water heating system. And note here that it's not required to be an instantaneous like it is for new construction. So you have a little more leeway. For your heat pump water heating, you can have either a heat pump water heater with additional requirements or choose that heat pump water heater with a NEA Tier 3 or higher rating. And then here's where it gets a little interesting. If the existing water heater is electric resistant, then you are allowed to do a consumer electric water heater. And additionally, if there is no natural gas connected to the water heater location, then your baseline is again that consumer electric water heater. So if you're planning on electrifying the water heating or the whole building and you do cap the gas, then your baseline is going to be a consumer electric water heater. Again, that's an electric resistance water heater. Doesn't mean that you should, do that from an energy efficiency perspective, but it does give you a little bit more leeway in terms of your code compliance. All right, let's move on to central water heating. Next slide, please. Yeah, so for new construction and large additions, there are still, an all-electric option and also a gas option for central water heating. The first option is a heat pump water heating system. And the sub-bullets here are really just, additional requirements that need to be met. The system, does need to be installed according to manufacturer design and installation guidelines, and additional requirements related to recirculation, fuel source, and storage piping. The other option is a gas or propane water heating system with a couple of sub requirements, but I think the one to mention is if you do install a gas central water heating system, you also have a solar thermal requirement as well. So that's just an additional system that needs to go into the building as well. And in 2025, we're not seeing any substantive changes to these requirements. And then for alterations, the requirements are the same that we just saw for the unitary systems. So again, that means, you can install a gas or propane system. You can install a heat pump water heating system. And if there is no natural gas to the water heating location, or it was previously an electric resistance system, then you are allowed to do electric resistance. Next slide, please. Now let's jump into space conditioning. So for new construction and additions, in this case, you do see that heat pump is the prescriptive baseline. You don't have a separate option for a gas space heating system. There's a few small exceptions. So for low-rise buildings, and this is buildings 1 to 3 stories, the prescriptive baseline is a heat pump in climate zones 1 through 15. And only for climate zone 16, the prescriptive baseline is an air conditioner with a furnace. Another feature of the prescriptive requirements is that if you do have a balanced ventilation system, then you will need to also have heat recovery ventilation as well. Oh, I got a note that it's hard to hear. Let me go ahead and try to change my speaker really quickly. Can folks hear me? Okay, awesome. Thank you for that note. So continuing with dwelling unit space conditioning, we're talking about a heat pump baseline for low rise and also for high rise. I'm sorry, I'm getting another note. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Let's continue with high rise. These are buildings 4 stories and higher. And the prescriptive baseline is a heat pump. For climate zones 1 and 16, you have a dual fuel heat pump option. And then just a note that systems other than those that are listed here are allowed through the performance method, and this is a theme throughout energy code. So for example, multi-zone systems or central systems using central boilers or chillers are still allowed with the performance method. Let's go on to alterations. Next slide, please. The most common that you'll see will be a complete change out of your space conditioning. And for alterations, the baseline is your heat pump again for climate zones other than 1 and 16. And just a note here that a supplemental heating unit may be installed, provided that the unit thermal capacity does not exceed 2 kilowatts or 7,000 BTU hours and does need to be on a 30-minute timer. And another note, air sealing requirements do apply for existing or new ductwork in your alteration projects. So if you're working with ducted systems, you will need to be complying with duct sealing and leakage testing. You'll have those requirements and testing requirements as well. But the good news is alterations do not have to meet electric ready requirements. So if you are installing or keeping a gas system, you don't have to also increase that electrical capacity to provide for future electrification. So that can be a cost savings, keeping things cost effective with energy code. All right, well, we've talked about electrifying end uses, but now let's go into renewables and storage. Next slide, please. Okay, solar PV. All multifamily buildings are required to have solar PV via the prescriptive approach. In the 2019 code cycle, solar was included only for low-rise multifamily buildings. 2022, which is our current code cycle, expanded solar to all multifamily buildings. And that is not changing in 2025. All multifamily buildings shall have a newly installed PV system meeting the requirements of Joint Appendix 11. The sizing is going to be determined by the equations in this section of code, which is section 170.2, or the total of all the available roof area multiplied by 14 watts per square foot. So the smaller of those two is your sizing. And I know that I've been contrasting prescriptive with the performance method. You can do some trade-offs. However, solar PV is very difficult to trade off. So, this really should be considered as almost a mandatory requirement for all new all new multifamily buildings. Now, you may be wondering, what is JA11? That is the joint appendix that has provisions for the PV equipment and install itself. So it does include requirements for system orientation, shading, solar access verification, system monitoring and interconnection requirements, and then your certification and enforcement requirements. Additions and alterations do not have a PV requirement in Energy Code, but of course, voluntary PV will be installed on retrofit projects, especially electrification projects in many cases. Let's take a look at battery storage. Next slide, please. So building energy storage system, or BESS, that's the kind of mouthful way to say battery storage. Here we do see a more a smaller subset of multifamily buildings that have a battery requirement. So low-rise buildings do not have battery required per code. We just do have it for mid and high-rise multifamily buildings. So all buildings that are 3 or more stories that are required to have PV are also required to have battery storage systems, meeting the requirements of Joint Appendix JA12. And again, the sizing is going to be determined per equations within this section of code. And just a quick note on mixed-use buildings. There are a couple of commercial building types, commercial space types that have battery requirements as well. So where the building includes more than one of the covered space types, the total capacity of the battery is going to be for each of the types and then summed together. And let's quickly talk about JA12. It covers qualification requirements. So that would be, equipment certification and types of equipment, and then rules around interconnection and net energy metering, and of course, enforcement. And similar to PV, we don't see battery requirements for additions and alterations. This is just a requirement for new construction, but voluntary systems are, of course, allowed and may be applicable to a project. All right, on the next slide, I am going to talk briefly about mixed use and commercial buildings for solar, and then following up with battery. Only some commercial building types have PV requirements. This slide shows the building types under 2022 code in the first table. And then it shows the types required under 2025 building code. So a couple of takeaways for 2025 is that, well, the big one is that solar has been expanded for commercial buildings. So sub-bullets, a couple of new building types have been added in and are now required to have PV. And those types are religious worship and sports and recreation buildings. And then the second takeaway is we do see a higher watt per square foot requirement for some building types. So events and exhibitions, hotel, motel, restaurant, and retail grocery now have basically a larger PV requirement. The systems have to be larger for those. So takeaway, expanded solar requirements for commercial. Next slide, please. This is our same format. It's for battery storage. Similarly, only certain commercial building types are paired with that battery prescriptive requirement. And under 2025 code cycle, we see those same 2 building types that are added to the table. So religious worship and sports and recreation have a battery requirement now as well. The other kind of takeaway for changes here is that without getting too in the weeds, the battery sizing methodology has been redesigned under 2025 code cycle. And in my opinion, it's made it more easy to understand. So I think that's a pretty good change there. Great, so that kind of sums up our electrification in energy code. Let's go quickly to electric transportation. Next slide, please. So an electric building really, is not complete without our EV chargers as well. Cal Green, which is Title 24, Part 11, covers site development, and within that, it has requirements related to EV charging. Next slide, please. So, thinking about planning for EV charging, buildings need to be ready for increasing electric vehicles. There is a goal in place for every new car sold in California to be electric by 2035. Next slide, please. For the sake of time, I'm actually just going to skip this slide. Let's go to the next slide, please. So EV parking space definitions, just everyone to get on the same page. We have a couple of different ways to prepare for EV chargers. The first is an EV capable space. This is where a parking space has electrical panel space and load capacity to support a branch circuit. It also will have the necessary raceways to support EV charging. And then one step above that is going to be EV ready. An EV ready space includes obviously the electrical panel space, load capacity, and a branch circuit itself. It includes also raceways to accommodate EV charging and terminates in a receptacle or charger itself. And then EV charger, this is your off-board charging equipment used to charge an electric vehicle. And you'll also sometimes see EVSE, which is electrical vehicle supply equipment. So without further ado, let's look at the requirements. Next slide, please. Under 2022 Cal Green, there are EV infrastructure requirements. And there are requirements for new construction and also for alterations. So for new construction, all multifamily buildings will need to have 10% of total spaces EV capable. And if you remember, that means it does have electrical capacity. And then 20% of total spaces need to be EV ready. EV ready means the branch circuit is installed and there is a receptacle ready for an EV charger to be plugged into it. And then additionally, multifamily buildings with more than 20 dwelling units do need to have 5% of total spaces with an EV charger installed. And that 5%, it can be out of the total 30% of the EV capable and EV ready. So for alterations, multifamily, when either adding or altering parking spaces, 10% of total added or altered spaces need to be EV capable. And then just to round it out with commercial buildings will need to have 15 to 30% of the total spaces to be EV capable, and then 25% of those total spaces to have an EV charger installed. Now, if that sounds like a lot of electrical capacity, let's see how that could be managed. Next slide, please. Load management. So an automated load management system is something that can be used to kind of keep costs down for that electrical capacity. It allows the installation of more charging capacity than a building has electrical service. And what it does is it varies the power supply to each charger based on the number of vehicles that are charging. So if you have fewer vehicles charging, then more power is distributed to each vehicle. If you have more vehicles charging, then you have less power per vehicle. And this is actually allowed per code. So Cal Green does allow an ALMS. Again, that's an automated load management system to be used when the total number of EV spaces is installed beyond the minimum requirement. And then for commercial buildings, ALMS can be used at any time. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you all. I know we got some great topics coming up.
We could probably jump to yeah. Yeah, thanks for all that valuable information, Ari. It's definitely some great stuff. So now we'll be switching gears a bit. I'll be going over some decarbonization and incentive programs. Go to the next slide. So decarbonization and affordable housing, why it matters. So when we talk about decarbonization, what we're really talking about is finding ways to reduce or even eliminate carbon emissions. But in affordable housing, it's more than that. It's about also improving the residents' health, lowering their energy bills, making homes more comfortable, and really just keeping long-term operating costs manageable. And the reality is that a lot of older gas appliances don't just use more energy, they also contribute to poor indoor air quality and higher utility costs, and especially in older buildings. So that's where electrification and decarbonization comes in. By really replacing these outdated gas systems with efficient electric appliances and pairing them with renewable energy like solar PV. And the goal would definitely be to make homes a lot more cleaner, healthier, and more cost-effective to run. And we can't forget, a lot of these communities often face higher utility burdens and aging infrastructure. There tends to be some limited resources and greater exposure to environmental challenges, like extreme heat during a summer heat wave and so on. So when we address decarbonization, in the affordable housing space, it's we're not just cutting emissions, we're really aiming at creating these healthier, more resilient, and essentially more equitable places to live in. Move on to the next slide. So program incentives and rebates. So affordable housing within the state of California has this wide subset of programs that can be applicable to projects from wherever you are located. And as you begin exploring these different incentives, you notice that there are a couple of key factors to consider when choosing which ones to enroll into. There's not one single program that fits every project. And so each program comes with its own specific requirements, and there's a different set of guidelines. So it may limit your options that you have available, but the good thing is that there's this wide range of different programs. So there's something out there that for sure fits the project. So there's things like the measure types, the funding timelines, location, the property types, and things like that would be taken into account when reviewing eligibility. So, for example, when we look at the measure types, there's the electrification, energy efficiency, solar PV, EV charging. So there's some programs that have a specific set of measures that could be included into a scope of work. And if you're looking for different measures that one program may not have, this is where we encourage to co-leverage. And so the good things that all these programs have this flexibility. And so there's also funding timelines. So some of these programs may be on the multi-year, some are annually allocated, some are short-term, or might be even a pilot program. So as you begin to kind of browse these different energy rebate programs, it's important to take into consideration what these timelines are looking like and the allocated funds that these programs have available. Another thing is the location. So if it's statewide, regional, if it's based off of utility territory, or if it's local. So for example, there's a Lightweight program that is available statewide, and then there's a program like the camera program that's more LA specific. So as we kind of look into this, it's important to see what their boundaries are in terms of location. And then, of course, the property types, if it's for the existing building, if it's new construction, low income, general market, public housing, these different programs have different requirements. So for example, like build is new construction, so an existing building would not be eligible for build. So yeah, it's important to really assess the details to ensure that you select the program that best meets your needs and the overall meeting the eligibility. And in case you're unsure, the AA team can help guide you in the right direction, or your assigned technical analyst will be able to further support you in the whole leveraging process and finding the program that best fits your project. Move on to the next slide. So here at the partnership, our sustainability team currently provides support with the intake and implementation of 4 programs, soon to be 5 with EBD on the horizon. So we help connect affordable housing providers with these different funding opportunities and really help navigate owners on the program rules and really just identifying ways to layer incentives to cover more of the project costs. And so to really put these programs into perspective, This table highlights the eligibility of each of these programs that we implement. And you'll notice that there are a couple of differences, such as like the project, the AMI level, incentive types, and the different territories they cover. So, for example, starting off with build. Build is a residential building decarb program that provides incentives for the support and the adoption of advanced building design and all-electric technologies for new construction. And so this program is really intended for a market transformation and make clean energy technologies accessible in the affordable housing space and development. So the good thing too as well for Build is that it also offers 300 hours of free technical assistance and up to 2 million in financial incentives per portfolio. And now when we look at the programs like Light Up and Camera, they not only offer incentives for electrification and energy efficiency measures, but they also provide incentives for solar PV on existing buildings. So, all within a single program. And this really makes it a great option for comprehensive upgrades, especially when they're leveraged with two different programs, really putting together that scope of work. And LIWIP has allocated around 124 million since its launch, and Camera had allocated 75 million since their launch. So for these specific type of rehabs and upgrades. And then the SOMA program, this program is specifically designed for solar on multifamily projects in IOU territories. And similar to these other programs, they provide incentives for tenants and common areas. And SOMA's uh, main goal here is delivering clean energy and bill savings to both the providers and the tenants. And so they also offer workforce development opportunities, tenant education, and no-cost technical assistance to make going solar a lot more simple and providing that support with any needs necessary. And so just with some recent updates, it includes incentives for integrated storage and expanded eligible costs, so such as like the roof repairs. And it is also encouraged to co-leverage this program with other rebates that can help incentivize energy efficiency and electrification to create a more comprehensive scope of work. So, for example, like a LIWIP and SOMA project, SOMA would help with the solar, whereas LIWIP will help incentivize with the energy efficiency measures in the scope of work. So really getting the best of both worlds here. And lastly, as for EBD, this is a new and upcoming direct install program that is funded by the California Energy Commission with over 400 million allocated for the next 5 years. And so this program will install energy efficiency, electrification equipment, and related upgrades at no cost. But I will mention that for the EBD program, it is split into three regions. So there's the NorCal, the Central, and SoCal region. And in terms of our team here at the partnership, we were selected for both the NorCal and SoCal team. So we're really excited about this opportunity, and the application window is still not open yet, but definitely keep an eye out, and we'll share more details as that window becomes open. We'll make sure to have the information available. So if you have any questions about these specific programs, feel free to reach out to me or anyone on our team, and we'll make sure you're pointed to the right contact on starting off your search on these programs. On to the next slide. And so key considerations when it comes to planning and implementing energy upgrades, there are a few strategies that can make the process more effective and essentially more financially feasible. And so first, kind of looking at the available replacement reserves, seeing how they can be used to support your project, and at the same time thinking about how you can leverage multiple funding programs, just combining the incentives, rebates, any tax credits, federal or state funding that can help close the funding gap and make the project more affordable. And then as well as prioritizing properties based on portfolio size or urgency. So really looking over the portfolio of projects that you have and seeing if there's any projects that require more of an urgent assistance or an urgent rehab in comparison to maybe it might be like a newer project and you're just interested. So kind of looking over the portfolio and seeing which projects are more need of going through a rehab. And then conducting benchmarking and energy audits. There's tools like the Energy Star Portfolio Manager that assist with the technical analysis of the building's energy performance and evaluating the building system. So through these different benchmarking tools, it really helps the technical analysts oversee the current structure of the building or the building envelope and seeing where is the need in terms of creating these new the scope of work with new technologies and for the project. Then we also have the engaging tenants in the community. So as a part of these programs, they're new technologies, they're measures, and it's a scope of work that has more advanced kind of details. So as a property owner starting off this journey, it's important to really engage in the tenants, engaging in their interests and seeing how we could provide education and helping them be more informed about the changes that will be happening at the site. And then the last item that we have here is monitor post-retrofit performance and tracking progress and measure outcomes. So once the installation is complete, just kind of overseeing these upgrades and tracking the performance and seeing that everything's working well and there isn't any issues that arise from the whole project being completed. Just some things to take into consideration. We go on to the next slide. And so this slide just kind of showing a high level as steps for the rebate process. I will mention that a lot of these programs, this process tends to vary a bit. So this one, I would say, captures more at a high level what the process will kind of look like, where initially we'll be submitting the application and you'll be having an initial pre-screen and benchmarking meeting. So with the program, there is an assigned kind of like intake representative or specialist that will do initial pre-screening and check eligibility depending on the program's criteria. And then once a project is marked as eligible, you'll be moving on to technical assistance and having a site visit. And so through this site visit, this is where the scope of work comes into play, where your assigned technical analyst would help develop the scope of work that has different measures and provide the incentive that is being offered through the program. And so once everything's kind of locked in, you'll have the incentive reservation, construction, claiming incentive, and the post retrofit monitoring. So I would say I think for other programs it kind of varies, at least for claiming the incentive. There's some programs that could provide the incentive in phases, or there's other programs like LIWIP where the incentive is provided after the construction has been completed. So it really varies, which is why I have this little side note there. But in case if you're confused in any way, we are of assistance to really make sure that the clarification is provided up front and knowing when it is exactly that you'll be receiving the incentive for the program. What's the next slide? And so to put this into perspective, from developing the scope of work, incentives, and leveraging, here's an example of a LIWIP project. And what I just want to highlight here, it's a project of 46 units, and off to the left, you'll see the different measures that were included in this scope of work. And so these two red boxes is what I want to focus on for today. There's the estimated install cost. So you can see that it's up to around 944,000. And then LiveWhip was able to offer roughly around 236,000. So there's quite of a large funding gap here when it's a LiveWhip only project. We go to the next slide. And so for this scope of work, it's the same project. The main difference here is that two other rebate programs were added into the scope of work. So you'll notice that it's the MAHIP program, the Energy Smart Homes program, and added on with the LIWIP program. So collectively, you'll see that the incentive that was offered through these three programs had added and it minimized the funding gap. So it's definitely something to consider when exploring these different programs, because the end goal would it be to have hopefully some sort of full coverage, if not maybe some sort of a gap that isn't as large compared to a live only project. And I will mention that next week for our session 201, we'll be having a section dedicated to program layering. So there'll be more information dedicated to the specific type of leveraging process and what that would look like. And then my last slide, I think is just some additional funding resources. So we'll be sharing out these slides after the training, and these are links that will help you start with exploring these different programs. So, the AA program website has some programs listed on the programs that they help implement. There's also the Switches On, Desire, and the Climate Smart Housing Collective. So as you explore these different websites, I think these are a good start to see what's really out there, and you're able to filter out specifically the project that it is that you're aiming to enroll. So yeah, and in case of any questions come up, we'll be your point of contact or with the folks over AEA to help you get started on this incentive journey. And that sums up my section. So we'll now open it up to Q&A for any folks that have any questions, comments.
Yeah, so we definitely have a couple questions in the chat and some have come up along the way. So I would like to encourage if there's anyone that had questions that they put in, didn't get full answer, just to repeat them or ask for some clarification. Also, if you had questions that came up, now's a great time, throw them in the Q&A. We have our lovely speakers here to help you out with those. So the first one, thank you so much for this, Michelle. I'm going to read it verbatim just to make sure you get everything. Though, Ari, I see you're typing, but if you'd rather answer out loud, I can give you the space to do that. During the transportation section of the code, the discussion only mentioned the 2022 code, not the 2025 code. There's significant difference in the code, especially related to access to affordable access to EV charging. Why was the 2025 code as related to multifamily EV charging not mentioned?
My apologies, that was just an oversight. So I'm looking up that and I'll put some information in the answer.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's great. And Michelle, I hope you get your answer. And yeah, if not, we can follow up with more information. And Bradley, I see your message as well. I will definitely get those links off the slide and put them in the chat, though I will mention again that these slides are going to be sent out, so you will have access to them after the presentation. And again, I encourage you to please put any other questions in the chat while you have our wonderful speakers on hand to help elaborate on them. Well, oh, thank you, Angela. A lot of our older housing stock does not have the electrical capacity for electrification when we do rehab. Are there any programs that can help with upgrading services? Angel, maybe I could direct this to you as you've gone over some of our programs, but also anyone on our panel can take this away if you are familiar with any.
Yeah, I know with the Equitable Building Decarbonization Program, there is some funding available for electrical capacity upgrades. Yeah, that's a big problem with a lot of the programs where they don't actually fund the capacity upgrades needed to install some equipment. But at least with EBD, there is some funding reserved for that.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate that. Oh, I saw one come into the chat. So pardon me. Does CHP offer an estimate of how much funds can be gleaned from each of the programs that we manage?
Yeah, I could help answer that question. So our team would help with a lot of the initial intake and eligibility process. You wouldn't be able to really know how much of an incentive you'll be receiving for the project until you're at the technical assistance stage. So once the site visit is completed and the scope of work is developed, your assigned technical analyst will be handing you a breakdown of the incentive that will be offered through the program. So here at CHP, we wouldn't really be able to give you a solid number. It wouldn't be until technical assistance where they'll give you the exact dollar amount for the program.
Mara, as someone on the implementation team, I understand the no rule of thumb that blind entry does make it hard. There are sometimes some averages that we can present to you. However, for project specifics, it is hard for us to give you those numbers because we don't want to give you something that is inaccurate and not, an overpromise or underpromise. So yes, trust me, we totally understand. But the best we can do is give you all the information we can on the programs. And we hope that this gave you just a nice, a little bit of insight, but hope you can reach out if you have any more questions. Jonathan, thank you so much for your question. Is it fair to say experts are no longer recommend L1 EV chargers and are now recommending low power L2? Ari, is this you? I might direct this your way.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, the fact is that the requirements under Cal Green are all level 2. So the level 1 doesn't really meet those requirements. You know, that's one consideration. There's probably some applications for level 1, but level 2 is just, improved charging time as well. So that would kind of be my thoughts on that.
Yes, as our team said, please put those answers in the Q&A. But Eli, I do see yours. What policies have been most affected at accelerating the transition of existing buildings to all electric, and why do you think that they worked?
I guess I could take a stab. I mean, there's been a really concerted effort from the entire California administration to transition to all electric to some degree. Part of it's the building code, part of it's funding resources for kind of affordable housing, especially to go all electric. Other things have been program requirements. So, for example, the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Program requires all electric. So, kind of developers know ahead of time they need to plan that in or bake that in ahead of time before even applying for funding. That has been good. I think one of the biggest things that has been an issue is these electrical panel upgrades or just upgrading the grid in general. We have seen, transformers not being installed or not being installed at a timely manner. So affordable housing developers have to like replan their entire development around it, which has been really difficult. And so I think the grid upgrades have been really hard in making sure electrification happens in buildings, and generally in new construction and in rehabs. The other thing is just the electrical panel upgrades have been difficult. And right now, with rising electricity prices, it's really hard to convince or talk to residents in some ways that this is necessary when people's bills are going to go up pretty significantly, potentially, depending on how much electrification happens, right? Solar does help offset that quite a bit. So programs like SOMA is really helpful in that regard. But things like induction stoves, right? That's going to be a big drain on the grid and use a lot of electricity, and that's kind of hard as well. Hopefully that answers your question. It's kind of a lot there, but I'm happy to talk to you after this.
Well, I would like to thank the first half of our panel, Angel, Ari, and Andrew, or AAA. You did such a great job. And I please invite everyone to stay on for the second half. We're going to have some great information on decarb technology as well as utility allowances. So we're going to take a quick break. Please get some water, get a little snack, walk around. I saw that there is another question. I may keep it for the second half of the presentation just because I want everyone to be able to hydrate. But thank you all so much and see you in a couple minutes.
Alrighty, welcome back, everybody. And now we'll be handing it over to Scott, who will be talking over some decarbonization technologies. Scott, the floor is yours.
Cool. Thank you so much, Angel. Can everybody hear me all right? Can someone just put in the chat or something? I know there were some audio issues before, so I just want to make sure before I talk. Great. All right, cool. So I'm Scott Adler. I work for the Association for Energy Affordability. I'm a technical assistant here and work on a lot of multifamily retrofit programs. I think I was looking through the list of participants, and I've worked with some of you before. The first section here, I'm going to talk about decarbonization technologies. Basically, what are they, how do they work, and why might you want to install them in your properties? So next slide, please. Cool. So why electrify buildings? I think this has been covered by some of the panelists initially. Hopefully also you were curious about electrifying buildings coming into this webinar, but I'm going to go over some of the key reasons in the next slide. So next slide, please. Great. So as I think Ari mentioned, there are lots of policies, regulations, and codes. These are all moving towards all electric buildings, especially here in California. Secondly, all electric buildings are cleaner and they're better for the environment. So if we're trying to fight climate change, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, this is something we need to do. Thirdly, there are a lot of pollutants emitted from gas equipment that's unhealthy. It worsens indoor air quality, can also worsen outdoor air quality. Gas equipment is also pretty dangerous. Well, it's not pretty dangerous, but it's more dangerous than electric equipment. You have open flames with gas equipment. Basically, all of these gas technologies have big grills, which are just burning open flames. So electric equipment is generally more safe for residents for your building. New technologies are also more efficient. They improve the experience. They improve occupant comfort. One key example here is that in our warming climate, people love having cooling in places which are getting hotter and hotter. So these heat pump technologies, which I'll be talking about, they have cooling. Next, this more efficient technology can achieve energy and utility bill savings. So that's something that is always of interest. And then finally, as Angel talked about a little, there are incentive programs out there to help cover the costs. So this can be especially advantageous if you have equipment you have to replace anyway. Why not use incentive programs, lower your costs, and replace that with more efficient equipment? Next slide, please. Okay, so now to talk about what are these electrification technologies. Next. So there are a lot, and could you just, Hilda, just you can click through as they come up. So the first one here is a mini split heat pump in the top left that provides heating and cooling. The one below that is an induction cooktop. That's how you can cook cleanly with electricity rather than gas. The one right in the middle there is a heat pump water heater that would replace your standard gas water heater. Solar PV is a great way to be able to generate your own electricity on site. Batteries are becoming a bigger and bigger thing when we think about how do we kind of arbitrage peak and off-peak prices, or how do we add resilience and power outages. This white appliance here is a heat pump dryer, so that could replace a gas dryer. The black one here is a heat pump pool heater, so that could replace your gas pool water heater. And then finally, there are EV chargers and there are EVs that people are going to be driving more and more, and we need EV chargers, EV charging capacity in our buildings. Okay, so I'm going to go through these in more detail. Something I said a lot in that last slide was heat pump, heat pump, heat pump. And I think, again, a lot of you are familiar with this. So you might know what heat pumps are, but in case you don't, a heat pump is a device that uses electricity to transfer heat from a colder place to a warmer place. And the key here is that heat pumps transfer heat. They don't directly generate heat like electric resistance or like a gas flame would. So first of all, heat pumps aren't that weird or even new of a technology. We've been using them forever, and all of you have one. A refrigerator is a heat pump. Refrigerators move heat from a colder place, which is inside the refrigerator, to a warmer place, which is outside of the refrigerator. So it's pumping heat out of it to keep the refrigerator cool. Typically, though, when we're talking about electrification, we're talking about creating heat from a heat pump, which is just the cycle happening in reverse. So this diagram here shows how you create heat using a heat pump. If you start at point 1 here, you have a hot refrigerant that is inside a space. Assume this is for HVAC, so it's going to be blowing hot air into the space. You have this bright red hot refrigerant. some of that heat gets blown into space, and then that refrigerant will cool a little, which is shown by it being a little lighter red as it moves to 2. So now you have this not super hot refrigerant, just this warm refrigerant. The next step is it goes through an expansion valve where the refrigerant is allowed to expand. And when it expands rapidly due to the refrigerant's properties and thermodynamics, it drastically cools and it becomes this really, really cold refrigerant, displayed by that dark blue color. That really, really cold refrigerant actually is colder than the outside temperature, let's assume. So when that refrigerant gets pumped outside to the evaporator, which is part 3, it actually picks up heat from the outside because that refrigerant is so cold. So now that refrigerant that it was really cold from being outside and from absorbing some of the heat from just the cool outside temperature becomes this kind of cool refrigerant shown by the lighter blue. Then in point 4, that now cool refrigerant gets compressed, and again by the refrigerant's properties, by thermodynamics, compressing that refrigerant really heats it up, and that's how you get that really hot refrigerant again, and you can just keep going through this cycle, moving heat from one place to another. On the right here, I just show an example of how this would work with a heat pump water heater. If you look at the air in, that little red arrow on the top left, that's where your kind of room temperature or ambient air comes in. Cold air then goes out the top. That heat that you extracted from the air, that gets sent into the water heater. You obviously have cold water coming in the back. It gets heated up from the heat it extracts from the air, and then you have hot water going out, so all your residents are happy. And again, this cycle can be flipped in reverse, and that can create a cooling effect. So heat pumps can do both heating and cooling. Next slide, please. Okay, sometimes there are a lot of questions which are, how is this any different from electric resistance? We're using electricity to make electric resistance heat. We're using electricity to make heat pump heat. And the key difference is, again, heat pumps move the heat. They don't generate it directly. And this allows them to be over 3 times more efficient than electric resistance. And electric resistance, that's just those old baseboards you might see. It's also those plug-in space heaters. That's kind of electric resistance heating. So if you're 3 times more efficient, that means you're using 1/3 of the energy to heat the same space, to cool the same space, or to heat the same space if we compare it to electric resistance. And that's going to save you energy, it's going to save you money. Another reason to use heat pumps rather than electric resistance is they're using less energy. They also typically use a lot less power. So if you're able to use less power, you might be able to avoid some expensive electrical capacity upgrades, and that will save you time in your project and save you a lot of money on your project. And then, as I mentioned before, I might keep going back to it though, people really like heat pumps because they're one piece of equipment that can do the heating, and if you want it to do, it can also do the cooling. So it can do both of those things in one system. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk through each of these and show a couple examples of how these technologies are used. And heat pumps is a wide selection of them. There are tons of products out there, and there are maybe 5 large categories I like to define. The first is a mini split heat pump, which is that bottom left photo there. There's an outdoor unit that creates the heat or the cold refrigerant that gets pumped to the indoor unit, and then the indoor unit blows that heat or cold air into the space. The second is a ducted split system. This is very similar. Again, this is a top left photo now. You have that heat pump in the bottom right, which is on the outside. It's doing the same thing, creating hot refrigerant or cold refrigerant. Then it sends that refrigerant to the indoor unit, which is now an air handler, and that blows the hot air, the cold air through ductwork to your spaces. So it's very similar to the split system, it just has ducting. The next one is a packaged system. And an example of this is the bottom right, where you might have this one rooftop unit. It's got everything in one. It's got the heat pump at the top, and then maybe through the roof, it has that air handler right below it. And this is doing the same thing, as it's just all in one unit. It's no longer the split system. You can also have through the wall systems. These are really common. You see them in hotels where you have one piece of equipment going through the wall. The outdoor heat pump is kind of on the outer side, and then the air is getting blown or distributed to the room through the inner unit. And I don't have a photo of this, but it's less common. Sometimes we see central or variable refrigerant flow systems. And this is if you have one large piece of equipment one large heat pump piece of equipment, and then you have maybe refrigerant lines all through a building to multiple apartments, providing that refrigerant, which will eventually be heating and cooling to all of those units. So again, heat pumps are great. They provide heating. They also provide cooling. There are a lot of times where we don't have a cooling in existing buildings, but we really need it. And they're also good because they have really good air filters. You can run these in fan-only mode, and they can dramatically improve indoor air quality. Next slide, please. Cool. Heat pump water heater is the next one. Again, there are tons of heat pump water heaters out there. There are different kind of sizes and forms for any application. The probably most basic one is an integrated tank, and this is in the top left photo. This looks really similar to what a tank gas water heater might look like, and it can be replaced for a gas tank water heater. Sometimes it is ducting that can sometimes improve the efficiency and is sometimes necessary. It's not always ducted though. The next one is a split heat pump water heater. This is the top right here, where it's pretty similar to that mini split. You've got that outdoor heat pump unit creating hot and cold refrigerant or directly hot and cold water for the Sanco system. And then you have kind of the indoor unit, which here is just a big storage tank, which is holding all your hot water. And then what's really common in multifamily is these central water heating plants, and there are alternatives for central heat pump water heating. This here is an example of a skidded product with the heat pumps on the outside and then with storage tanks on the inside. Heat pumps, one consideration for heat pump water heating is that it takes a little longer to recharge the hot water than a traditional gas water heater would. So to combat that, they generally have larger storage volumes, so you have more hot water as you're slightly more slowly recharging the tank. So that's a consideration, that the size is usually a little bigger than it used to be. A really cool thing about them, though, is that you can schedule them to take advantage of cheaper off-peak electricity prices, and this can help with utility bill savings. So it's basically a big thermal battery you can charge at any time of the day, and if you do schedule it to run during off-peak electricity prices, you can save some extra money. Next slide, please. All right, induction cooking. This uses kind of the electromagnetic energy to directly transfer heat to the cookware. So this is a special thing about it. It's different from electric gradient or electric resistance cooking, which heats up kind of the surface or heats up a coil, which then heats up a pan. This just directly puts heat straight into your cooking appliance. So this makes it more efficient. It also makes it a lot safer because you no longer have this hot surface, you no longer have a hot flame, it's directly heating the pan. So it's safer and it's faster. If you're not at all familiar with induction cooking, I do recommend you try it out yourself. A lot of utilities, CCAs have loaner programs where you can rent a little induction cooker. I think you also get an induction compatible pot or a pan with it. And it can be a great thing to just try out for yourself just to feel comfortable with it. Next slide. Heat pump dryers, these can be direct replacements for gas dryers. They're still emerging, or they're not widespread yet, I would say, in the US. One benefit that people are really liking about these is they're making kind of combined washer or heat pump dryers. And this does simplify the laundry process. You just put your clothes in, start it, and then come back 2 hours later and your clothes are done. They do typically take a little longer in the drying cycle than a traditional gas dryer would. But again, if you have a combined cycle, then the time it takes you to get to your laundry, move it from the washer to the dryer, it might make up for that and actually be faster. However, due to the limited projects so far, and due to the limited energy savings from dryers, we typically see electric dryers as a fine substitute for gas dryers if you're trying to electrify your building. Next slide. Heat pump pool heaters. So you can also replace your gas pool heaters with heat pump pool heaters. These do a really good job maintaining pool temperatures. They might take a little longer to initially heat your pool at the start of the season, but you're not talking weeks or anything. It's just maybe a few more hours. And they have great COPs. They're usually operating COPs around 5, which means they're producing 5 times the amount of energy for every 1 unit of or kilowatt hour you're putting into it. So these we have seen some good utility bill cost savings from. Next slide. Okay, solar PV and batteries. Once you have, or if you are thinking about electrifying your building, a great way to kind of protect yourself from any rising electricity costs is to install PV. And even if you're not doing that much electrification, or if there's not that much left to do, adding PV is a great way to lower utility bills, both for residents and tenants, which was mentioned earlier. With the batteries, again, you can be charging these in off-peak times, discharging them during peak times to get extra savings. And batteries are also being seen more and more as nice to haves or even maybe necessities if you need resilience, if you don't want to see power outages, or if you're somewhere where there are a lot of public safety power shutoffs, but you need to be providing power for reasons. Next slide. EVs, EV charging, and electrical upgrades. EVs, I would say, are not common right now for low-income residents, but there are more and more affordable EVs being made or planned to be made. There is a second-hand market for EVs that is developing, and it's believed that these will be cars that everyone will be driving very soon. So we should be planning for EV charging in our buildings to meet these future needs. Electrical upgrades, it's nice if you can avoid them by being smart about the technology you're choosing, but sometimes it is just necessary to do electrical upgrades. You may have to upgrade sub panels, main panels, feeder wires, transformers. There are lots of pieces of equipment in the electrical upgrades category. But one final thing, which Ari did mention a little, is load management strategies. And I think these are being accepted more and more by jurisdictions and codes. And they're things like smart panels. You can also use circuit shares, circuit splitters, and sometimes they're a really economical strategy to avoid very expensive electrical service upgrades. Next slide. Okay, so we talked a lot about technologies, but there are definitely other things to consider when you're doing electrification. Next slide. So we haven't talked at all about energy efficiency, and obviously energy efficiency should be done with electrification, and it should be done first as well. Energy efficiency is usually even lower cost than electrification. It provides immediate comfort, energy savings, and cost savings. Energy efficiency is also really important to do before electrification because if you can reduce your energy demand on the building, then you can often size equipment to be smaller. That smaller equipment that's now correctly sized, you get immediate savings from the cost you're purchasing cheaper equipment, but you can also see really big impacts in your project if the slightly smaller equipment works within your existing electrical constraints. And then you don't even have to do these huge electrical upgrades that you might have had to do if you didn't first tackle energy efficiency and reduce the loads on your building. So energy efficiency, like electrification is great to do, but always pair it with energy efficiency. Next slide. The resident experience is also really important. I think there's a false narrative sometimes that electrification technologies don't provide the same level of comfort, experience that gas technologies do, and that's not true. Electrification technologies, they really should provide a similar or in some cases better experience than existing equipment. There is definitely a learning curve though, and you do need to, with any new technology or anything that's new, people initially are going to have to make some adjustments and get used to it. But the goal is that after you train residents, you train staff to use the new equipment and to use it to its potential. They get a really good user experience out of it. Hopefully they can use it to save energy on their bills as well. Maybe it adds cooling that they didn't have anymore and they're really happy about that. So training tenants, training staff is really important. It's also important to think about where equipment's being placed. Heat pumps have compressors like refrigerators, which make a low humming sound. If it's a louder humming sound, you might want to put that right next to somebody's bedroom. So there are some things you need to consider with the new heat pump equipment to make sure that everybody is happy. And Induction, I didn't mention this earlier, but it does require induction compatible cookware. So if you go and put induction cooking everywhere, we highly recommend providing people with a basic induction cook set just so they can get started on their induction journey without any hurdles immediately. Next slide. Okay, and there are a lot of challenges with electrification, but none of them are things that cannot be solved. So I've listed a few common ones here and just a few common replies to them. Again, there are a lot more and probably a lot of different ways to reply to them as well. So the first one is that the equipment is really expensive, especially compared to a like-to-like replacement. And that's true, and that's why we have incentive programs to help. The goal of the incentive programs is to bring down the costs, that hopefully it's a cheaper replacement to get this more efficient equipment than what you would have been installing anyway. There are really high electricity prices, especially here in California, and there are fears that by electrifying, you're going to increase your own owner utility bills and maybe your tenant's utility bills as well. And if you were to install electric resistance, I would say that's definitely a valid concern, and I would not recommend doing that at all just for the utility bill increases. But again, heat pump technologies are really efficient. They're like 3 to 5 times as efficient as your electric resistance or gas technology. So typically with this, and typically with choosing favorable utility rate plans and enrolling in utility programs with your equipment, you can see cost savings with electrification technology now. And in the future, natural gas prices are forecasted to rise faster than electricity over the next couple of decades. So looking ahead as well, we believe that you will see utility bill savings with electrification technology. As I mentioned before, there's a training component. If you have new equipment, people need to learn it. It's typically a pretty small learning curve, and ultimately people get a better user experience. So we see it definitely worth a little bit of training to teach people how to use something new. Locating equipment can be a headache, as I started to mention in the last slide. Maybe the sound is a little noisier than it once was, so you want to locate that equipment in a slightly different place than it used to be. There are lots of considerations. Is it going to be close to an electrical panel? How are you going to deal with the ventilation, the noise concerns I just said? Are you adding more storage, and are there going to be structural concerns? So there are things to think about definitely for electrification. It is a retrofit that does require careful planning and design, but technical assistance is here to help through programs. Contractors also are getting more and more familiar with this and doing a great job being able to design these projects. Heat pump water heaters, it was also mentioned before, they do create hot water at a slower rate than existing gas water heaters did. But the solution here is just having greater hot water storage, and this is proven to be successful. As was mentioned in the last slide as well, induction cooking requires compatible cookware. Anything that's magnetic is compatible. So if you think of cast iron, stainless steel, if you're using those already, you can keep using those with induction. However, we definitely do recommend providing basic induction, like a basic pot and pan for tenants in the minimum, just in case they don't have anything so they can keep cooking. EVs do take a long time to charge, especially when you compare it to pumping gas into an internal combustion engine car. And the solution here is just installing EVs at home, at work, other locations where cars are idle and they can take a while to charge. And then electrical upgrades, as people have put in the chat already, they're hard, they can take a long time, they can be costly. The first thing you always want to do is see if you can avoid electrical upgrades by selecting efficient equipment, first doing energy efficiency. That's the most important thing. If you do have to do electrical upgrades, it's important to plan them to make sure you future-proof your building so you only do the electrical upgrades once. It would not be fun to have to do electrical upgrades for one reason, and then 5 years from now decide you want to install induction cooking and have to do your electrical upgrades again. And I think I might be done with this section, but let's see if there's another slide. All right, so I finished that section, and I think there are going to be questions at the end. So I'm going to go right into the next slide, the next section here, which is about decarbonization pathways. And a lot of you on the call might have kind of really good comments about this section, which is all about like, how do you decarbonize your portfolio? Some of you have probably been working in your sustainability teams and development teams for longer than I've been at AEA 3 years here as a technical assistant. So please, if you have like useful things, put them in the comments and help each other out. I think a great place to start, though, is to set a goal. It's good to have a clear vision and to work towards something in your portfolio. So the DOE has a better climate challenge, which aims to reduce emissions by 50% across your portfolio in 10 years. So this challenge started in 2020. I realize we're 5 years into the challenge. If you've already joined it, which I think a number of you on the call might have, that's great. If you haven't joined it yet, if you think you can achieve 50%, that'll be great. If you want to set a more achievable goal as well, that's also good to do. But starting by setting a goal so you can have a vision and working towards something is really important. Next slide. So once you have a goal, where do you start with electrification in your portfolio? Next slide. I'm going to start with what I think the answer is, which is just submitting an interest form to an energy program. Once you submit an interest form, it kind of opens the door to a lot of other co-leveraging opportunities. It opens the door to technical assistance. It's, I think, a really good place to start if you are starting on your journey. I have LIWAB up here as a program to submit to because it works all over California. The utilities also have some single point of contacts, which are meant to help you start with them, and then they can find the programs that work for you. And then I think this was mentioned before as well, but Tech Clean California has the switches on, which provides great information on available resources if you're interested in electrification. Next slide. And Angel covered this great, so I'm going to skip over this really quickly, but the incentive landscape is confusing in California. There's tons of programs, there's lots of money out there, but some of them have no money right now. Some are going to get money in a year from now. Some you have to be less than 4 stories to qualify, so you might not qualify. There are all these rules. They have different measures, different timelines, so all great things Angel covered. But technical assistants are here. They are familiar with all of these programs. It's a free resource for you, so I highly recommend you utilize technical assistance to help you navigate this confusing rebate landscape and make the most out of it. Next slide. And just a plug for AEA if people are not familiar on the call. AEA is a nonprofit. It works on technical services, research and development, policy and training, all in multifamily building, energy efficiency, affordability, electrification. We provide technical assistance for a lot of these programs in California, and we're always here to help. Next slide. This has been covered by Angel, so I'm going to go really quickly over this, but how do the incentive programs work for you? Next slide. You can co-leveraging incentive programs is a really effective way to get the most out of them and to minimize your out-of-pocket cost. Basically, you cannot take money from the same funding source. So there are a number of different funding sources here. This is not a comprehensive list, but LIWAP and SOMA come from cap and trade. Tech comes from the state budget. The California Public Utilities Commission funds the regional energy networks, the IOUs. CCAs have funding or incentive funding sometimes. Grants also can be leveraged from local city ones or privately. We see people get funding from banks sometimes. So this can all be co-leveraged together. Just basically the structure here is that you can't be co-leveraging rows from the same column here. You've got to be grabbing from different pots of money. Next slide. And Angel also covered this great, but this is kind of what a typical multifamily retrofit process looks like. The blue is what you as a property owner might do. The gray is what the program might do. Again, this depends from program to program. If you're motivated, if your scope of work is fairly small, and you're maybe working with a menu-based program where it's easy to get that reservation, you could see a timeline closer to 3 months is possible. But typical timelines we see for these large, comprehensive multifamily retrofit multifamily retrofits is typically like 1 to 2 years. So just be prepared. It is a long process. It's definitely worth it, but there's just a lot of things that go into it. Next slide. And there are some questions sometimes about what is the energy audit? What do we do? It's very similar to an ASHRAE level 2 energy audit, which also might mean nothing to people. So what it involves is seeing a sample of apartments, the common areas, and from that we basically for most of the programs, we'll build an energy model, which we can use to simulate energy conservation measures. So that's kind of how we look at the building, we identify what opportunities there are, and we, from that, identify what are the savings and incentive potentials from that. Also, during our site visits, we like to look at existing electrical infrastructure to start thinking about what are potential constraints. And we like to think about where can equipment go, like what equipment might we start recommending for selection, where might we like to locate that equipment, are there any other considerations? Next slide. And then, Angel, I'm not sure if you touched on this, so I'm going to repeat it. Apologies if you did, but incentive programs are generally paid at the end of construction once everything's complete. However, there are opportunities to phase with some programs. Some have like 25% payments up front. Some, once you've purchased materials, can provide up to 50% of the costs. And then if you're just waiting on permits for certain measures, which might be delayed because of the permitting office or whatever, there's some other thing which isn't in the energy efficiency scope that's delaying the project, we can typically pay 80 to 90% for measures that are fully installed but just waiting on permits. Note, this does change program to program. The second two bullet points are kind of Lywood bullet points. The first one is a Bay-Ren bullet point. So program to program, this does change. But if you can phase, it can sometimes help a lot with the cash flow for your projects. Next slide. Okay, so hopefully you're excited about this. And a big question I sometimes find when working with property owners is kind of what property should you upgrade first? And there are two ways to look at it. The first way is like I call it like the idealist way to prioritize your projects, which is where can electrification have the most beneficial impact to my portfolio? You might have aging equipment that needs to be replaced. You might have really high utility bills that you want to reduce. Residents might need cooling in a place where they don't have cooling. So if you want to tackle this, the steps are usually to first evaluate the properties. Do you have P&As? Do you want to get P&As? Can you have an energy audit done? Talking to residents about how equipment's working. Then kind of reviewing utility bills. Are you wasting a lot of energy somewhere, or is there particularly high usage at one property compared to others? And then ranking property in order from here to understand like where are the needs most for electrification. So that's the idealist approach, but I think what more typically happens, next slide, is there's a realist approach, which is like, okay, where can electrification actually be implemented in my portfolio? And this depends on things like, is there available funding from incentive programs? Do I have reserves? How costly is this project going to be? What electrical constraints exist? So this is where I think most of my projects come from, more like the realist perspective. So for this, the typical process is to first review available program funding for each property. So looking at a map of California, where is there incentive funding? Where are your projects? And narrowing it down to, okay, let's look at projects where there is incentive funding available. If you already have work planned on a project, then increasing or maybe improving some of the efficiencies to meet program requirements and co-leveraging incentives can be really effective and a really fast way to make projects happen. Looking into available reserves is good to do early on. There's no point developing a big scope of work and then saying, oh no, we don't have money this year. Like we're not going to have reserves available for another couple of years to do a project. Getting contractor bids early is important to understand how big the costs might be. Evaluating electrical infrastructure is also important to do early on. And then once you have done all of this, you can start to kind of rank the projects in order of like, where is it really feasible to do these electrification upgrades? Next slide. Cool. So now I'm going to go over some common questions or considerations. Next slide. Okay. Can you do everything everywhere all at once? And the answer to that is definitely no. It's unrealistic to do everything everywhere all at once, but you do want to plan for being able to do everything eventually. So a more real question is, if you have a project, can you do everything all at once, or should you phase that project? And the answer to that question just really depends on, it's a project by project answer. If you can do all of the electrification work all at once, that typically will maximize your incentive because you can co-leverage the most programs. For example, one might require an all-electric building at the end. You can't co-leverage that earlier. You could only have used that if you do it all at once. However, there are lots of limitations that might make phasing more favorable to you. If you have something that's failed, like your water heater right now, your water heaters, and you need to replace them, then it might not make sense to replace them with a gas water heater and plan to do everything all at once 5 years from now. It might make sense to tackle this project in phases as things are failing and need to be replaced. You may also have limited reserves to do everything all at once. There may be electrical upgrades that take 2 years to upgrade, but you still want to start electrifying some parts of your building earlier. Next slide. Another question I sometimes get is like, what are easy things? What are hard things to do? I'll give some examples here, but this is also kind of a case-by-case basis. If your existing AC equipment had electric resistance, or existing HVAC equipment had electric resistance or AC, there's generally electrical capacity and it can be replaced with a heat pump easily. If you're already replacing equipment, I've usually found that that's an easier sell to property owners to replace it with slightly more efficient equipment, use incentive program dollars there than replacing equipment that might be new. If you have adequate electrical capacity, that's great. That makes all of these things a lot easier. And if you have large water heater closets, this is like a little more nuanced, but that helps with the water heater replacement a lot, or gives you a lot more options for product selection. What are hard things? Hard things are building conditions. If you have historic buildings, it can limit what can be done. If there's asbestos in the building, it can limit ventilation options and other things. Replacing gas stoves, this typically triggers electric panel upgrades and potentially other upgrades upstream. Electrical constraints such as undersized equipment, aluminum wires, things like that can also cause electrical issues. And then obviously any code violations, if there are subpanels in closets, if there's knob and tube wiring, issues like that just add on another level of complexity to the project to resolve those. Next slide. Another question can be like, I have unitary or central equipment. Should I change it? Typically, the answer is no. Typically, it's easiest to replace a unitary system with a unitary system, a central system with a central system. Some reasons you may ever consider switching from central to unitary is if you have a really bad distribution system. If it's failing, if it's not providing people with hot water or whatever it might be, then it might make sense to look into more kind of distributed or unitary systems. Also, if there's an issue with locating new equipment, that could prevent you from locating new equipment centrally and make it unitary. You can also encourage conservation by moving cost to the user. Great, I'm getting messages that we need to wrap up, so I'm going to quickly move through this slide. You can switch for other reasons from unitary to central, which are just similar reasons to the ones before, but kind of flipped, and it can provide residents with a lot more space if you move the equipment to central. So next slide, please. I'm going to run through these last ones really quickly. Looking ahead, next slide. To post-construction success, this was all talked about before, so I'm not going to mention it, but tenant education, maintenance is important. If equipment's really complicated, then having maintenance contractors with knowledgeable contractors. And monitoring for large systems is really important if these systems are providing lots of electricity or will have a big impact on your utilities, such as solar PV and central heat pump water heating. Next slide. Future proofing is really important. If you're doing any work now, it's important to consider what your building eventually wants to look like fully electrified, and making sure the work you do now sets you up for success. And then final slide, I think it is. The tech portfolio roadmap is coming out, and I think a lot of you on this call have participated in that, or some of you on this call have participated in that. This is one way to kind of get you started thinking about electrification in your portfolio. It can rank your projects by they did maximizing greenhouse gas savings, but you could also potentially use a method like this for another thing that you want to maximize out of your portfolio. it's important to have some kind of energy benchmarking to see your goals and success. And a cool thing about this, which I think will be really useful, is that it can categorize similar properties within a portfolio. So if you successfully implemented a retrofit package somewhere, you can replicate that success on other similar projects. So that's it. Thank you. Sorry, I think I went late.
Thank you, Scott. Hi, everyone. I am Blanca. I'm going to introduce the concept of utility allowances. Next slide, please. Great. This slide illustrates the relationship between utility allowances and rent calculations in affordable housing. This is a critical, this dynamic is critical for affordable housing, especially when planning electrification. So any adjustment to the utility allowance will shift the balance between rent and utilities without increasing what the tenant pays overall. Next slide, please. The role of utility allowances in affordable housing helps reduce the tenant's utility burden and prevents, and let me say that it reduces the tenant's rent to offset the utility cost and prevent cost burden. UA assumptions also drive rent limits, budgets, and underwriting for financing. So you can see that getting the UAs right keeps deals feasible and is important for tenant equity. Next slide. There's several utility allowance methodologies for today. I am only focusing on the published utility schedules that are published by the local public housing authorities, or PHA schedules, and the California Utility Allowance Calculator. Next. This is a handy comparison table. I'm not going to go through the entire table. I just want to point out that the PHA standard schedules are based on average utility cost, while QAC is based on performance-based, project-specific modeling. Also, as it relates to electrification and financing, QAC is far more efficient, and it allows providers to demonstrate the lower tenant cost and savings to support higher rent limits. Next. The issue for electrification is that UA rules make it harder for providers to reflect the residents' real utility cost and be able to capture electrification benefits. Next. Here we have a QAC example. QAC is more accurate, as we mentioned, but it may not always be lower than the local PHA schedule. This example is taken from the 2022 QAC workshop, where National Core showed how they made the numbers work by expanding solar beyond Title 24 and splitting the solar benefits with residents, 64% for tenants and 40% for the common areas. They figured out that by increasing their solar investment, they could reduce the QAC to $49 for a one-bedroom compared to $63 from the local PHA. With this approach, they not only protected residents from rising utility costs, but also created $26,000 in operating savings. Next slide. In our second example, we have a standard schedule published by the Housing Authority of the County of San Diego. The table compares pre-retrofit and post-retrofit allowances for a one-bedroom unit where the tenant pays these utilities. On the left, I list the electrification-friendly features. The standard schedule clearly calls out the use of heat pumps for space, heating, and hot water. Notice that the rates are lower or the same as for gas, which may more accurately reflects the use of heat pumps and the efficiency. In this scenario, the project can decrease the utility allowance by $5 per month per unit, supporting investments in electrification technologies. Next slide, please. In this example, we are looking at the published allowances for the County of Los Angeles Development Authority. This example shows a shift from standard to an all-electric schedule post-retrofit. Here, the post-retrofit allowance would be $33 higher per month per unit. This is because the space and water heating allowances are twice as much as pre-retrofit. The key point here is that PHAs may, even if they include heat pumps, they might not include, they might not be as accurate. And also, most PHA do not offer heat pumps or energy efficiency schedules or all electric schedules. So there is a lot of need for PHA schedules to be modernized. So this concludes the presentation portion. We're going to go on to the next slide, please. We have a quick poll. If you could please provide some feedback, that would be really important for us in answering these two questions. What is your comfort level with utility allowances? And also, would an in-depth training on UA schedules be helpful to your work? You can, yes, and we'll take a minute for that. We are towards the end of the presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to, you can see when you receive the slides. If you can go to the next slide, please. We're going to leave you with some resources on utility allowances, and hope you can join us next week for a discussion that includes energy analysis on rehab case study. Turn it over to Jacqueline for any last questions that might come up.
Thank you so much, Blanca. And I would like to announce we have a post-event survey. We'd really appreciate if you guys could fill out. We can get a little feedback and also hear what might be helpful for future presentations. I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but you can find our information online, so please feel free to reach out to any of us should you think of something after. And once again, I would like to highlight that these slides will be sent out and this presentation will be available to view again on our YouTube should there be anything you would like to revisit or to send to one of your teammates, colleagues, friends, etc. So thank you all so much for joining us. Please join us again next week for our part 2. So yes, thank you all and have a great day and a great lunch. Go.